Hey everybody, Quaver here, and I wanted to talk about a specific thing today. Improv. Phrasing. Trying to get better at a little bit of what you hear versus what you know how to play. Unfortunately, there's no easy way of getting better at it than trial by fire. Trying to go ahead and actually play with a metronome tends to be a little bit harder because you're not exactly hearing a specific key. Playing with a metronome is great. Playing with a backing track when you're working on your phrasing and improv is much better. Making sure that you're playing in key is probably one of the most essentials, especially when you're getting into something like classical or blues or jazz or any subtype of subgenres of metal. One of my favorites tends to be classical. An easy way for you to go ahead and actually get better at improv is just choose a particular backing track that's in a key that you're focused on and that you're learning and play along with it. Trying to play in rhythm is still one of the most essential, if not the most important. Now, for those who want to go ahead and actually have an in-depth part of trying to go ahead and actually get better at playing something, try and focus on this. You're playing the scale, don't let it play you. Yeah, at first it might be easier for you to go ahead and do something like playing up the scale, where it's like, but most of the time it's actually better to add a motif, like, or adding something in as far as playing the next scale above it or the scale below it. Now, I know it's not as easy as it seems as far as trying to go ahead and play something like that when it comes to you're barely starting. A lot of the intermediate and advanced players have an easier time playing like this when it comes to doing anything that they hear because they've been playing simply longer. That's it. Most of the times you're still learning the same things. Whenever you become an intermediate to advanced player, the one thing you start to focus on more is technique training, trying to get better at a particular way of playing the guitar. Just like this. Now, this is a technique that I use most of the time for a warm-up as well as a shred pattern to go ahead and actually get faster, cleaner, and at least a little bit more of this gets put into my playing. This is a technique that I like to call emptying the bag. All you're doing is you're starting on one string, on one particular fret, you're playing a 4-note run that's ascending, and then you're going to end on that same fret but on the next string, and vice versa whenever you're doing descending compared to ascending. So it's going to look something like this. 5, 7, 9, 5. Notice how I ended on the same fret, but different string. Now I'm going to do the same thing, but going up the scale. I'm only going to use a whole step scale. Not exactly something that's musical, but it has some practical applications. 5, 7, 9. That's where I'm using my index, middle, and pinky. So I'm just using, and I'm going to stop on the G string on the 9th fret. And I'll explain why. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep going, but I'm going to play it in 4-note runs. Now, I'm going to do the same thing, except for this time I'm going to go backwards. Whenever you pick up speed, it actually becomes pretty shred-like. Something that's actually really cool is I was alternate picking every single one of them. Now, you don't have to just stick to a 5, 7, 9. You can move it throughout the fretboard. Something that's actually very valuable to know is the further down the neck that you get, up here close to the 12th fret, it's going to be a little bit easier. The further up here on the neck you're going to play, it's going to get a little harder, mostly because you have to go ahead and actually let your hand stretch because of the bigger frets, the bigger placement, and because it's a little bit more of an awkward angle, but just only slightly. Now, something that's also valuable is you don't have to stick to a whole step scale. You can do whole step, half step, whole step, just like this. That was whole step, half step. Now I can do half step, whole step, going from 5, 6, 8. Now, I said the reason why we're stopping on the G string, I'll tell you here in a minute. The reason why is because everything else is strung within a fifth. B string is not, it's strung within a fourth. So hearing that as far as something that's close to ear training is a little bit difficult, especially whenever you play throughout the entire strings. Most of the time, I recommend playing it on a clean channel. That way you can hear each precise note. You can hear the musical value as well. But it's up to you. Distortion is not going to hurt it at all. Now, the next thing is actually really cool about this. The more strings you have, the harder this exercise tends to be. So for those who play gent, 7, 8, 9 string, you're going to have a harder time doing this, but it's a great exercise and your hand will probably be hurting afterwards. Just kidding. It's not going to hurt that bad. But still, it's a bit of a pain of an exercise when you get faster and faster and faster. So, practice, practice, practice. One of the things that you're going to hear from me all the time is the more you practice, the more you'll get better. Just makes sense for the most part. But you have to realize that you should practice as much as you end up having a lesson. This is how I divide it up. Every time that I have a student in a lesson for about an hour, I tell them to practice 8 hours at a time during the week. Not at one time, altogether. So if it goes from Sunday to Sunday as far as us having a lesson, I would say during that time, try and collectively practice at least 8 hours. So maybe 30 minutes to maybe an hour a day. If we have a 30-minute lesson, it drops to half, about 4 hours at a time. Now, that does not say that you're going to improve at a certain light speed if you end up practicing more. You're just going to have a lot more time as far as trying to practice that particular technique, that particular song, or anything that we're in lessons with. Now, take this with a little grain of salt. Other guitarists might advance further along than you. Others might take a little bit more time. Just depends on how much you want to spend on it. But practice will always have reflection on it. Making sure that you're able to get faster, more clean, the more knowledge you have as far as putting in phrasing, chord transitionings, difficult techniques, everything in between. Well, hope that was helpful. See ya. Oh, sorry, it completely didn't dawn on me until the last minute. The reason why I call it emptying the bag is because it kind of reminds me of Mary Poppins. Whenever she sat her bag on top of the desk and just kept on pulling things out, or just kept going and kept going and kept going and kept going. It kind of reminds me of the same thing. If you had an endless amount of strings, it would just keep going. Sorry, a student kind of described it like that, and from then on I was like, hey, that's kind of cool. I'm going to use that. I'm going to borrow that. See you later.